last week was a beautiful weekend of simcha for us to see all of our children growing and graduating and going on to the next phases of life. Um, so we're going to continue today on Daf Ayin Beis Amid Beis with a Mishnah that we have been referencing for months and months, because much of what's in this Mishnah, you'll see as we go through it, is not anything new, but it's putting into words that which we have been studying and talking about. Before getting to the Mishnah, I would like to take a few minutes and go through something that I read, a halachic presentation that I read on our subject, which I think will be extremely enlightening and will help lead us, I think, into the Mishnah and into what follows. Because we're going to be talking about contracts that you put down the money today and you get the goods later, and then the question will be, when you get the goods, is it equal to the money that you paid today, or is there ribis involved because it may be worth, let's say, more or less, and how you get around that. That's the subject matter. So what I want to read to you, I want you to maybe to all listen and we could discuss it, is a real life situation. We keep talking about, well, not hypotheticals, but things that may or may not be as relevant to us on an everyday life. This presentation is something we can all relate to because we've all done it. So let me start and say, okay, two people go out for lunch, right? And the bill for lunch is $39.82. So one of the two people goes ahead and he puts down two $20 bills, $40 for the $39.82, and then they go and then they leave. Now, the two 20s that he put down are one for himself and one for his friend, which means that he is loaning, right? He's making a loan of $20 to his friend to advance for the charge for lunch, which was $39.82. After the fact, his friend repays him with a $20 bill. He doesn't give him back $19.91, which would be one half of the bill. He gives him $20. The shaila is this ribis? Because he loaned him $20 when they paid for lunch. He should get back $19.91, which was the chelik, the split chelik.
Yeah, half the bill.
But the friend gave him back 20. Is this ribis? Because he now made 9 cents extra on the bill, right?
So the first thing that comes to mind is, let's assume that this $39.82 presumably included, quote, included the tax and included, more importantly, quote, an automatic 15% tip, whatever.
Right. It was the total bill.
Right. So the question is this guy, because it wasn't clear in what you said, did this guy put down two 20s and walk away, meaning effectively an extra 18-cent tip, which would be implied to be split between the two of them? Or did he did he hand that to the cashier, and since tip was already included, the cashier handed back 18 cents and he pocketed that? That's the question.
So the facts of this particular case are that he left the two 20s and he walked out, and there was no reimbursement. There was nothing. He just left the two 20s, one for himself, one for his friend, which means he loaned him the $20.
Right.
And the question would be, what would happen now as far as
so then in my mind, and you're going to spend now the next hour figuring out how I'm wrong, but that's okay. In my mind, the question would become down to, is he effectively loaning the other guy in 1991, and he's on his own saying, you know what, I'm just gonna, rather than dealing with waiting for the cashier, and I'm gonna leave the extra 18 cents? Or is he uh or is he saying, you know what, it's pretty clear to both of us that at this kind of a number, we're just going to round it off. And so we're going to split that extra amount also. And then it's truly loaning the guy 20.
No, but the other guy can say, look, I get the $20 back and the difference is a tip. That's all. Forget about it. I'm
Right.
walking
That's
out.
that's the issue. Are they both working under the assumption that they see this kind of a number and say, yeah, duh, of course, we're going to split that extra amount to be an extra tip. And so in the end, it's 20 and 20 and done.
And it can't be
Or
ribbis because nobody took away money. So
right.
there can't be any
there's no
ribbis.
ribbis. Then it's pretty clear.
Or why can't it be that the guy threw down $40 to pay for lunch for his friend, and the friend came back and gave him a 20, which was half because he paid his share, which was giving him a gift in turn. So why does this have to be that it's a ribbis situation? People are allowed to give gifts.
Yeah, but if he's paying half the thing, that was probably agreed in advance. So we're basically
Not
each going to pay.
necessarily. I mean, I've had people put down money and I've given it back to them because they wanted to treat me. And I say, no, I don't want to treat you. You know, I don't, that's very nice of you. And I appreciate the gift, but I can pay for myself. So I give it back. Why can't we look at it? I mean, this is splitting hairs.
But interest is about splitting hairs.
Yes,
how many banks make money off of a penny here, a penny there? So
but you got to understand what the situation is. It's not a ribbis situation.
It could be. We need to know the more details.
Well, 1 second. Let the rabbi explain what is the difference of the small amount of money. How do you view it?
Right. So everything that everybody's saying is really on point, because as we're going to develop the sort of the story, you'll all understand what you're all saying, because Michael's talking about a gift, and you're talking about, and others are talking about a gift, and others are talking about, well, let's split the difference. So that's the fact pattern, and on its face, it looks like the person who laid out the money was lending his friend money, and he got back more money than he should have because of the bill and what should have happened. So prima facie, but before we get into all of this, it would appear that he is making 9 cents? He's making 9 cents return because the chalik should have been 1991. So on the face of it, it's out of kilter, and everything we've been saying will come to the fore when we further the discussion. All right, so that's the scenario. So now the presentation here says that the Gemara, which we are about to discuss, the Gemara on Ayin Gimel Amid Beis, we're on Ayin Beis, but this Mishnah and Gemara that we're talking about discusses a comparable case. What's the case of the Gemara? A person pays cash up front for produce that will be delivered later, right? He pays $20 for produce that will be delivered later. And the vendor, when upholding his end of the deal, gives extra produce. So instead of giving him $20 worth of grapes, he gives him $20.50 or $21 worth of grapes. So he's giving him more than than the money is worth. So l'chayra, it looks like ribbis. Okay. So now,
give somebody a gift. Is that called ribbis?
Okay, but we don't know that it's a gift, Michael. I mean,
if there was no contract between the two of them.
A gift is not ribbis, for sure.
Right.
Well, then if somebody says, I'm going to pay for your lunch, don't worry about it. Why are you looking at it?
But in the context of the case, we can't assume it was a gift. How can you assume that someone, in repaying not the correct amount, is giving
If
a
I
gift?
tell you I'll pay for your lunch, if I say go to lunch, I'll pay for it.
Okay, no, but that wasn't the case. Two people agreed to go to lunch. They agreed to split the bill. one of them had the cash up front, so he loaned his friend half the cost of the lunch, and he expected to be paid half the cost of the lunch. Instead, the fellow gives him slightly more than half instead of
Right, but the thing is that and most people looking at this would see A, that it's a round off type of situation, and B, more importantly, the guy didn't get change back. So clearly he was treating it as a $40 bill, not a $39.82
okay.
bill.
So
But the produce case is different.
Yeah.
The produce case is the guy may have wanted to ingratiate himself so the guy will buy again. So he gave him extra, not as ribis, because he didn't get something that he wasn't entitled to. The vendor knows how much the value is, and he said, look, I'm going to give him a little more. Maybe he'll come back to me next time. It's a gift.
But the question becomes maybe if the guy is doing it because he wants to give him a little extra to show just how wonderful his produce is and whatever, great. On the other hand, what if he's actually doing it partly because he's so appreciative? He needed a whole bunch of cash this morning to be able to go off to the docks to get a container full of stuff. And the fact that these people, this guy and maybe other people, were paying him in advance enabled him to do it. So then it really is.
So
ribis.
It is appreciation, and it's still a gift.
No, I would argue that in that situation, he's effectively loaned him money in order to be able to do his business. Now that's the question of whether business versus
he's
personal.
paying up front for future consideration. The consideration came in, and the vendor elected to give him a little more than he paid for. As you know, that's good business. I mean,
I agree, it's good
that's
business.
not ribis.
But maybe I would posit that that could be
force him
ribis.
to do it. He didn't force him to do it.
Yeah, but you know what? I think that gets down to an awful lot of the things we talk about. The nowadays we'd be writing out a thing saying, "Oh, and and add 2%, whatever," and back then more and more of the stuff was oral, and so if this is all implied, but it's still the same action.
But we're supposed to help our fellows. So if that would say that if somebody wanted to help somebody, and we've talked about this, they need produce for food and they don't have a lot of money, and the guy gives them $5 and he gives them $20 worth of produce. Is that ribis? That is being generous and helping your fellow person. If you want to misinterpret it and call it ribis, then you're not going to have humanity.
So what's fascinating about our discussion is that each of us comes from a bit different perspective, and we impute different thoughts into what each one is thinking. Oh, he wanted to ingratiate himself because he wanted to come back and buy, or as you said, Menashe, perfect opportunity. I get the money, and now I can immediately go ahead and do something, which, by the way, these are all things we've discussed in the Gemara, that the advantage of getting the money up front is that you can use the money and thereby buy more produce or do other things with it. So these are all part of the discussion that we've had, and it encapsulates itself here. And there's no right or wrong answer. We're all imputing different thoughts. So let's see how the discussion unfolds, because again, you're coming from different perspectives. There's no wrong answer. So the question is, what is going on here? So this is how it goes on. Although there are elements of this transaction that fall under the halachic world of mekach umemkar, which has been just mentioned before, that's part of commerce, right? I give you a 20, I round it up. It doesn't have to be exact, because mekach umemkar is it's a general term for doing business. So when two people do business, yeah, they each have in mind what you just said. Mekach umemkar. It's 1995. Here's a 20, but that's part of mekach umemkar. That's part of the give and take of general business. Is that what we're talking about? But many of the commentators understand that primarily this discussion is about ribis and not mekach umemkar. In other words, let's put aside the theory that people in business, there's such a thing as goodwill and all these other things, which there are. And by the way, that is part of the whole picture, which is why sometimes you can't say, oh, this is ribbits. It's goodwill. Goodwill is something that is translatable into dollars, theoretically, not actually. So the discussion goes on and says, no, let's focus not on Mekach or Memker and say, sweep the whole thing under the rug because it's all fine and good, but let's talk about pure ribbis that he gave him, that he lent him 20, that he lent him $20, and
He
the
paid back
fellow
20. Paid back 20.
paid back 20, but there was really 9 cents
It's
worth
not missing, yeah.
gain, so to speak, in this. Okay. So now let's go back to it. The
So
buyer,
the
buyer-
server, well, one second, excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
But the server who served them lunch,
no, we're not,
that-
yeah, okay.
does
We're
that
talking now about-
person, does that person put the change back on the table?
No, no, there was
So
no.
somebody-
He
So
just
somebody has to say, keep the
Jay,
change.
he put down the 220s and they walked out of the restaurant.
So in effect, he says, you keep the change without any words.
In effect, correct, in effect. Okay, now,
Excuse me, can
so
you
in
just,
the case of the, sorry,
can you just review this scenario? I think I missed something. You said there were two guys in a restaurant, one of them,
yeah, there were two guys went to a restaurant. They bought lunch. The bill was for $39.82. And one of the two fellows had cash. They didn't have credit card. They had cash. So he put down 220s on the table.
okay,
120 for himself and 120 for his friend. He was lending his friend $20
okay,
towards the lunch. And the friend later repaid him the $20, so that in effect the lender made an additional 9 cents, quote, so to speak, profit on his friend, because he should have charged him only half of $39.82 and not which just comes out to what, 1991. And so, but in effect, he charged him 20 instead of 1991. So those 9 cents looks like it's ribbis interest that he's getting back on the loan that he made of 20.
But he didn't get any 9 cents back.
He did because 39
It was a loan of it was a loan of 1991, and he's getting back 20.
And he's getting back 20. Right, exactly. So he's made 9 cents somehow through this whole transaction. All right. So now let's go back.
It made 9 cents if the waiter left the 9 cents on the table.
Right.
No. So we're making the assumption here for purpose of the discussion.
They walked out. Yeah.
That they walked away.
Right. The question becomes whether there was an implicit agreement that, just looking at the thing, and the other guy both of them realized they're leaving the money, literally leaving money on the table, that extra amount was split, or is the first guy, rather the second guy, the guy who didn't provide the cash on the spot, whether he only owes really half the actual bill, and the 18 cents is on the other guy for not sticking around to get change.
Right. So you can theorize, but what's the right, how to approach this? But these are the facts. So now, in the case of our Gemara, so we go back to here, let's put aside the case of the restaurant for a minute. So in the case of the Gemara, which we just said about paying the money and getting the produce, the buyer essentially loaned money until the produce could be delivered, right? And the vendor paid back more than the original loan by providing extra produce, which on the face of it is ribbis. Okay? So here, listen to this. The Gemara permits such additions, but the basis of the psak, we're talking about psak halacha. The Gemara permits such additions, but the basis of the psak is opaque, both in terms of rationale and the text itself. Okay. Now, various Rishonim offer different explanations of the Gemara. So bottom line, it's okay to do it. Al pi halacha, it's okay. But why is it okay? So now this discussion will go into the why, which will help us understand maybe the whole issue of ribbis that we're talking about. The fundamental dispute among Rishonim seems to concern this. Listen to this: the status of a loan at the precise moment of repayment. So the Rishonim are arguing is what is the status of the loan when it's about to be repaid? When one borrows money, the loan remains outstanding until it is repaid, right? Or in the case of the Gemara, until the produce is delivered. Once repayment has been completed, the loan is no longer extant. The question is, now listen to this, we're splitting this very carefully. The question is whether at the very moment the exchange is taking place, meaning the produce is handed over, is the loan already deemed concluded? In other words, he's handing in the produce at the end of the loan, or whether it's only considered concluded after the exchange has been fully completed. So now I know we're splitting this very, very finely, but the question is, when does that loan end? Does it end at the moment that he's giving him, exchanging the produce, giving him the produce, or whether the loan is still extant until the ink has dried, everything has been completed. Now we can say the loan is completed. So it could be a matter of seconds or minutes or whatever, but apparently in the thinking of the Rishonim, this is a big difference now.
But Rabbi, I'll go back to the point, we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
This is not a loan. It is a prepayment or a down payment for purchase, which means that it is a sale that has been agreed to, for which there's going to be consideration given in the case of produce. He's not loaning money, he's paying him in advance. If you want to not count it as revenue at that point, then you consider it a deposit to be made, which is not a loan. It's a matter of if you don't deliver on your produce, you're returning my deposit. That's not a loan.
Okay, so you're using the term deposit, and I can appreciate that. The Gemara is saying that when a person buys something for future delivery, then the way the Gemara looks at it is, I'm giving you money today. You say it's deposit, I understand. The Gemara is saying that I am you, vendor, I am lending you money. And for this loan, I'm expecting to get a repayment. Of course, if there's never a repayment because all the food is rotted and everything is done, then my loan is returned and there is no event. However, when you repay me, then you're repaying me for the money that I lent you. You're giving me something in return. That's the way the Gemara is looking at it, Michael. I understand you're looking at it from a.
So, Rabbi, the commodities market would not be accepted by the Chacham.
Right, which is why what we just said before is that if this transaction is in the category of mekach u'memker,
which it is,
which means buying and selling, which would be, you would be correct in saying that there's a deposit and there's a return, then we're speaking about something different than what this Gemara is talking about, because the Gemara here wants to focus on the ribbis issue. You could say, well, there's no ribbis here. This is strictly mekach u'memker. Okay, but the Gemara is saying if it's mekach u'memker and that's all we're thinking about, yes, then there's a different approach. Maybe there's a deposit, maybe there's this, maybe there's that. But the Gemara here is saying, forget about mekach u'memker. That's not how we want to couch this deal. We want to look at this deal as a question of a loan and a repayment of a loan. You can argue, Michael, that that's not what it should be. I understand that. And in the realm of the commerce, you wouldn't be wrong. You'd be right.
But Rabbi, would the Gemara consider, let's say he put that money in an escrow account.
In
an escrow account.
Escrow account, right.
Then it's and the terms of the escrow account are, of course, if the seller produces his goods, then he can take the money out of escrow. But if he doesn't produce the goods, the money reverts back to the buyer. So
that doesn't add anything, Michael.
Yeah, that doesn't change
but the Gemara is basically saying you cannot. The sale has to be consummated right then and there. There is no such thing as an advance sale. A conditional sale does not exist in the mind of the Gemara.
But Michael, I can come to you and I say, and I grow strawberries, and I say, Michael, lend me $100. Lend me $100. I'll give you $100 worth of strawberries.
But that's not
30 days.
But it's different than that. When the crop comes in, I'm buying $100 worth of strawberries to you. So I want to get first place in line to get the best strawberries. So I'm going to down pay this. So it is not a loan. It is a prepayment or a down payment subject to delivery. And I mean, we've gone around and around. I don't mean to belabor this, but it's not the way business is conducted in these days, and I'm quite surprised that it wasn't conducted that way in those days.
Right, and this discussion is conceding that if it's a Mekach Memker discussion, you are 100% right. But the Gemara wants to move it away from Mekach Memker.
But why can't it be either or, depending on the circumstances?
No, exactly the point. It can be either or. But this is a hypothetical discussion. If it's not Mekach Memker, it is a loan.
Then I'll back
right.
up.
In other words, you're not wrong if it's a Mekach Memker discussion, but we choose to make it a loan discussion, which is a separate track. But you're right. In Mekach Memker, it's a deposit, and there's no issue. But we're trying to get to a understanding of what the halacha is. This is what this discussion is about. So, so the question is, when is this loan completed? Is it completed? And
with the delivery of the product.
And then, right, as the transaction is going on, is that already the loan is over, or do we have to wait until every last iota of the deal is completed, and that's when it's over? Now, this question that we're talking about manifests itself most starkly in the way the Rishonim identify the level of ribis at the time of payment. So this discussion, it has a very subtle effect on the question of ribis. Now, the discussion of whether additions in payment constitute ribis mu'ucheres. We haven't yet discussed that, but ribis mu'ucheres means ribis after the fact. After the fact of the deal, there can still be the question of ribis. So, is the addition in payment, does that constitute ribis mu'ucheres, interest that is only collected after the loan, so it's not part of the loan? Or is it avak ribis, which we know is ribis d'Rabbanan, and therefore any interest that is incurred during the time of the loan is contingent on the status at the time of payment? So the question then becomes, the way you look at the repayment, is it ribis mu'ucheres because the loan is over and now he's getting an extra a bunch of strawberries or whatever he's getting, or is it simultaneous? And if it's simultaneous, it's not ribis d'oraisa, we know that. It's ribis d'Rabbanan because it's avak ribis, because in real time he's getting real time, not before or after. In real time, he's getting back more than what he should have from the loan. So we're dissecting this very, very finely to try to understand how the halacha comes out. Okay, now the Balataisvis maintain that an additional payment given at the time of repayment is classified as ribis mu'ucheres. So according to the Balataisvis, this particular situation would be interest after the fact. And we'll see what the halacha is, but they call it ribis mucheres. Consequently, unless explicitly stipulated as connected to the loan, an addition is presumed permissible because it's not part of the loan. In other words, unless there is they talk out specifically that, you know what, you're giving me $100, I'm giving you $105 worth of strawberries, in which case it would be a ribis. But if they don't talk it out and the deal is done and he gives them the extra $5, then according to the balatosis, that $5 worth of strawberries has nothing to do with the actual loan. It's an after the fact. I won't say specifically what it is yet because that'll come out in a minute, but it's an after the loan payment, and therefore we don't consider it ribis because it's ribis mu'ucheres. But this presumption would not apply if the moment of repayment itself deemed connected to the loan itself, in which case any addition would be inherently suspect and violate avak ribis, because if it's part of the deal, not after the deal, then part of the deal is ribis. So in other words, the way we understood and learned ribis up until now, midrabanan, is that I made you a loan, you were repaying me the loan, and in the repayment, you're giving me more than I lent you, and that's avak ribis. Fine, that's very classic. But if you interpret the loan to be paid once in the exchange, not at the end of the exchange, but in the exchange, the loan is already done, then after the fact, I'm giving you another $5 worth of strawberries. That's ribis mucheres. That's not ribis in the classic sense because it has nothing to do with the loan. It's after the fact. Okay, so that's the balatosis. In contrast, the majority of the Chachmei Sfard, who read Rashi and Tosfos, hold that any addition at repayment is categorically prohibited and considered avak ribis. They do away with this subtle difference of in the middle of the exchange, at the end of the exchange. He said that's a fiction that the balatosis came up with, and therefore the balatosis can split hairs and say, oh, it's ribis mucheres, it's avak ribis. The Chachmei Sfard said, forget about all of that. We only know of one thing. The deal is the deal. The guy's getting more money. It's avak ribis. End of story. So while the loan is being repaid, including the moment of repayment, the two parties still have a lender-borrower relationship, which leaves less room for leniency in the world of loans. They don't want to hear from this chilek of, yeah, it was after the fact, it was during the fact. They understand that this is one whole deal, like I think Michael would look at it. It's one whole deal. We can't split hairs. And therefore, if I'm getting back more than I lent, it's avak ribis, period. Now, all right, so that's really the machlokes of the Rishonim. Now, what's the halacha? The Shulchan Aruch adopts neither of these positions, not the balatosis and not the Chachmei Sfard, and they seem to articulate an intermediate approach which is rooted in the opinion of the Rosh. So in other words, the Shulchan Aruch, Rav Karo, when he was writing the Shulchan Aruch, and he said, what's the halacha? Okay, the guy gave him $100. The guy returned and gave him $105 worth of strawberries. It looks like interest, looks like ribis, right? Because it's not a mekach or memker, Michael. It's a strictly ribis question. It's a loan. He gave him a loan. He repaid the loan, and he gave him more. Classic case. Okay. So what do we do? So the Shulchan Aruch holds. It takes the opinion of the Rosh. What does the Rosh say? The Rosh concludes that the common leniencies that are permitted after the loan, meaning ribis mucheres, only apply if something additional is given at a later point in time. In other words, there has to be something additional handed over so that that extra money, which we consider to be ribis, is not ribis. Giving more than the principal at the time of repayment is prohibited. Why? Because that's ribis, even absent an explicit stipulation linking payment to the loan. So the Rosh is saying that the only way that this can be a kosher transaction is that after the fact, something else is handed over that makes this additional box of strawberries not ribis. In other words, something else is handed over. Indeed, failing to return exact change, like in our case, failing to return exact change, such when a friend covers a meal, would appear problematic because according to this interpretation, strictly speaking, he lent him money and he made a profit on the loan, and that's prohibited. However, common leniencies associated with ribas mu'ucheres are difficult to invoke, he says, as all extra payments at the time of the loan seem to be prohibited, whereas payments after the loan would be considered ribas mu'ucheres and would be permissible. So in other words, he's saying it's very hard to conclude that something is ribas mu'ucheres unless very clearly there's something else being transacted or handed over, and there isn't. It's simply what it is. So unless I give you, I don't know, I give you a ballpoint pen or I give you something else which would deem to be reasonable for the return of the extra box of strawberries, it's not ribas mu'ucheres because there's nothing given. Nevertheless, if the Rosh is understood as characterizing the prohibition specifically as ribas mu'ucheres, then there are grounds for leniency. In other words, the Rosh is complicated because in the Rosh, there is the subtleties require you to look at it as to whether or not it's ribas mu'ucheres, strictly speaking. If not, it's avak ribis. So the Shulchan Aruch, when he wants to paskin, he paskins based on the Rosh, and the Rosh is fairly strict. The Rosh is not very lenient when it comes to the question of whether or not something is ribas mu'ucheres or not. Now, when an additional amount is given solely to avoid here, let's go back to our case, not the produce case. Let's go back to our case. And by the way, our case is something that we do every single day. We go out with a friend. We put down money.
Business meetings.
The money isn't exactly exact. I give him 20. He gives me this. So theoretically, we're all over on ribis every day because of the way we treat each other. So now listen, we have to be careful. When an additional amount is given solely to avoid the inconvenience of making exact change, it's evident that no interest is intended. So now we're dealing with what is in people's mind. When a person puts down the 20, he's putting down the 20 because he doesn't want to take the 9 cents or whatever it is out of his pocket, right? Look at today. Give me an example. I go into now. It's of course it's Mekach HaMemker.
Same with credit cards today.
And I buy something, and I'm supposed to get 77 cents change on my purchase, right? And so I buy by cash, not by credit card. I don't get 77 cents. I get 80 cents because they're always giving me rounding it up. Is rounding it, and again, it's a purchase, not a loan. But theoretically, am I making 2 cents on this deal? I mean, if it was a loan, would I be over on ribis because I'm giving 77 and I'm getting back 80? So this is from a halachic standpoint. When an additional amount is given solely to avoid the inconvenience of making exact change, it is evidence that no interest is intended. On this basis, the Nesiva Shalom, which is a halacha, and the Chelkis Binyamin adopt a lenient position considering additional mitigating factors. Okay, so the mitigating factor is inconvenience.
Inconvenient. Yeah.
Second, we're close here. Listen to this, and Michael, to your point. Where close friends routinely exchange small sums, such payments may reasonably be perceived as a gift rather than interest. That's why when you were talking about this, Mike, in the very beginning, I didn't want to stop you because you were really being mechavan here to saying that one of the ways of looking at this isn't interest. This is, I'm giving you a gift. I'm taking you out to lunch. I'm giving you the 9 cents. So what? Big deal. Okay. So rather than interest, and this is the Dibros Moshe. So therefore, we have two interpretations. One, oh, it's okay because the inconvenience is a throwaway, or it's a gift. Moreover, b'di'eved, if the case is classified as ribis mucheres, let's say it is ribis mucheres, b'di'eved, there's neither an obligation nor a mitzvah for the lender to return the additional amount, even if the initial payment was improper. So now this goes to the question now of what about the repayment? Okay, I did something that wasn't 100% kosher. Am I responsible to repay it because I want to be a tzaddik? I want to be from the Chassidim Umas Ha'olam, and I don't want to be out there owing anybody. Says the halacha, you don't have to even repay it because it falls into the category of either I gave you a gift or because it's understood when we're dealing with such nominal amounts that everybody, you, I, everybody would say that you round it. And therefore there should be no consideration. Again, this is the halacha now speaking, because as a practical matter, we do this every day. Okay. Okay, now, however, these leniencies are complicated by the difficulty of fully delineating the Rosh's position. According to the most straightforward reading, the Rosh fundamentally agrees with Tosfos that an addition at the time of reimbursement only considers ribis mucheres. So the Rosh doesn't want to capitulate. He says, no, it's ribis mucheres. Which, by the way, is not, I mean, it's not ribis in our discussion. It's ribis mucheres because it's after the fact, so it's not really totally connected to the loan. He departs from Tosfos, however, regarding the presumption attached to a gift given at repayment, and he's saying that a gift given at repayment is okay. Tosfos doesn't. Although formally outside of the loan period, the timing creates a perception that the additional payment is an interest payment rather than a gift. And that's the aura, and the problem is because that it doesn't look like a gift. It may look more like an additional payment to what he originally took. By contrast, other interpretations understand the Rosh as fully aligned with the Chachmei Sfard and treat the time of payment on the level of avak ribis. Remember, the Chachmei Sfard were more machmir, and they didn't say ribis mucheres, which would be after the fact, which is really almost not connected to the loan. They said it was avak ribis. It was actual ribis midrabanan. The ambiguity in the Rosh is not merely theoretical. All suggested leniencies, whether permitting the additional payment or dispensing with any obligation or mitzvah of repayment, are framed by the assumption that the Rosh treats the prohibition as ribis mucheres, which would be okay, but he's saying it's not entirely clear. It would be much more difficult to employ these or other semantic justifications if repayment at the time of a loan should be categorized as avak ribis. Practically speaking, returning exact change eliminates the issue entirely. So, I hate to use the term, but he's almost yekish in the way he's trying to say that no penny can be unaccounted for. You've got to account for every single penny that you pay, and that there's no such thing as, oh, I'm mavata, I sort of give up on the money.
So,
Now,
Rabbi, in the strawberry case, if the guy gives them an extra basket of strawberries in addition,
right,
the correct thing for the recipient to do, let's say he's a chicken farmer, is to the next day give him a dozen eggs so that it wipes out any
that would be a good thing to do, Michael.
But not at the time of receiving it. He has to wait because otherwise it wouldn't look kosher.
Right, because if he gives him something, if it's ribis mucheres, because it's ribis after the fact, and then he gives him a couple of eggs, then that sort of wipes out the impression that, that there was even
ribis. Morasayan, it wipes out the morasayan, and that's
the ribis mucheres. Correct. Now, the punchline, and we'll all appreciate this of this whole article, is few mitzvahs are described as tantamount to the entire Torah. The prohibition of ribis is among them. Remember what we said in the very beginning, that the isser of ribis is such an overwhelming isser that the entire Torah cannot be, you can't balance it and say, oh, yeah, it's okay. The isser of ribis is isser of ribis. The reason why I read this is because it puts the whole discussion that we've been having for months and months into a very practical effect, because we don't think about it, but we in our daily lives, this, by the way, this isn't necessarily the only thing that we violate. We may violate other things without even thinking about it, without going into anything specific. But the issue of ribbis, because we all interact with each other all the time, and we're not necessarily exacting in what we do. Now, to your point, Michael, and I fully agree that, you use the term loan. I'm lending you money. Okay, but putting down a 20 for somebody and then somebody paying back, is that really lending him money? I mean, again, in the halachic sense, it may be, but we are all dealing with daily, whether it's mekach or memker, or whether it's just I'm treating you. Yeah, so what? So just give me back, round it up and give me back. We do that all the time. So therefore, in order not to be violate this isser of ribis, that's why the halacha, the Shulchan Aruch says that something, you can hang your hat on a couple of different things. He's giving him a gift, okay? Apparently, and this is a chiddush to us, inconveniences now become okay. The fact that it's an inconvenience means that it's normal to take that $20 bill and put it down, and the other guy's not buying. So we now hear that as a practical matter, the Torah isn't sort of out of tune. It understands that there are reasonable ways of looking at things, and therefore, in a practical everyday scenario, what we do as an afterthought doesn't necessarily have to be an isser. But I thought that the whole discussion really sort of put this into the fore. And this Mishnah, which I think maybe we'll hold off until next week, but this Mishnah, which is about to go into great detail about different aspects of what we call putting down money for later deals. Now, remember, we know that there are exceptions to everything we talk about. If there was a prevailing rate, right, or yeshlo, or you had the produce. I mean, there are exemptions to all of these things that we're going to be talking about. So it isn't just, every time you do it, there's a potential of an isser. But nevertheless, I think this whole exercise shows us the subtleties of halacha, that especially on this isser of ribis, that there are so many subtle ways of dealing with it. But to wrap this up, it's not inconceivable that this whole discussion of ribis on this subject, which the Gemara wants to identify, goes away in the course of commerce. Because in mekach or memker, ribis doesn't become the real central issue. Because like you said, goodwill. I'm giving you the extra stuff because I want you to come back and buy from me. That's real money. It's not, interest. It's real money. Goodwill. I want you to come back to me.
Public relations.
These are all
which
things
would be normal business expense.
That's right. And remember the overarching principle that we kept talking about again and again is the Gemara says we want to find a way to make it happen, not to not make it happen. We don't want to chill commerce. We want people to interact. If we're going to start being nickel and diming, pardon the expression, and we're going to be so exact on the penny, then how am I going to lend you anything? I'm always going to worry that I lend you something and got back an extra penny. I mean, it's almost shtuyot, because where do you draw the line? Which is why the halacha is practical. And it says, yes, there are cases when I lend you $100, you give me back 120. That's ribis. That's mamish ribis. There's no question about it. Other than ribis midoraisa, not that you should be violating ribis midorabanan, but now you're getting into the gray areas of what might be permissible because that's commerce. What might be permissible because I'm a good guy and I want to give you a gift. What might be permissible because who's going to bother? It's an inconvenience. Who's going to bother? So we have all of these other ways of looking at a deal so that we shouldn't be accused just saying, oh, you took advantage and it's ribbis. So I thought this was once I read this, I said, halachically, this is a really interesting,
Beautiful, right? Beautiful article.
current event, is because that's what we do every day. So, and it perfectly aligns with our Gemara. So, Mitzvah, next week, we're going to get into this Mishnah on Ayin Bays, so with Bays, and we're really going to, I mean, it'll be familiar to a certain extent because of what we've already said, but now we're going to be able to get a very clear understanding and a clear picture of what it means to transact in business and what should be considered rivers or not. So anyway, fascinating discussion. I'm glad we had the opportunity to really go through.
Unbelievable.
Thank you very much.
All right, yes, everybody. Everybody have a wonderful week.
Happy Father's Day, everybody.
Happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to everybody.
Great Grandfather's Day.
And